Hey Bible study leaders, welcome back to our clips on YouTube. We're looking at lesson 32, studying the character of Solomon. This lesson is entitled Guarding Your Heart. Let me give you some context quickly before we jump in, but we're looking at Solomon. David at this point has died and has left his throne to not his oldest son, but to Solomon. Solomon was the son of King David and Bathsheba. You might remember Bathsheba from the previous week, the woman with which David committed adultery and the whole sequence of sin that followed after David had sent to have her husband killed, Uriah. After that incident with sin, David comforts Bathsheba, takes her in as one of his wives. They conceive, and she conceives Solomon. And the Bible tells us in 2 Samuel that God loved Solomon to the point that Solomon is actually also named Jedediah, which translates to beloved of God. So Solomon is already special. Solomon is already appointed sovereignly, much like David. There's this connection between David and Solomon as being special to the Lord. We flip over into 1 Kings, where the story of Solomon begins, and it's interesting, Solomon doesn't necessarily just come into power immediately. There's some family conspiracies going on. David is old, and David is dying, and obviously when you're king and you have multiple sons and you're dying, you're old, the obvious question from those in your lineage comes up. And the question is, well, who's going to take over dad when dad dies? And Adonijah, one of David's sons, sets upon himself to determine that he's going to be the next king. And over a series of events, Solomon is instituted as a rightful king by David, appointed by David himself. And so begins the period of Solomon's reign. So we begin this lesson in 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 5 through 15. And I want you guys to notice what happens here. God appears to Solomon in a dream and tells him, Solomon, ask and I will give you whatever you ask. And Solomon replies, he asks for wisdom, but I want you to notice why he asks for wisdom, what type of wisdom he asks for, and just kind of the general context of what's going on. It appears through this text, as Solomon said, you have shown great steadfast love to your servant David my father, because he walked before you in faithfulness and righteousness. So he begins by just kind of recounting, retelling, reminding himself of what God has done in the past. And now, O Lord my God, he says in verse 7, you have made your servant king in place of David my father. There's this genuine display of humility. This is what's going on. And your servant is in the midst of your people whom you have chosen, a great people, too many to be numbered or counted for multitude. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern this, your great people? So notice the thrust of his request. He's not asking God, God, make me smart. God, make me a really, really intellectually capable king. God, help me be the smartest person ever. He's asking for wisdom to be able to discern between good and evil, between what's right and what's wrong, specifically for the guiding of his people. So we should ask for wisdom. James actually tells us in James 1, chapter 5, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. But, he continues, but let him ask in faith. So the idea here is, when you get to this first point, God gives wisdom to those who value it. Much more than just giving wisdom, and much more than asking for wisdom. The underlying intent of what Solomon is asking is, God, give me wisdom so that I can lead your people in your ways, so that I can make decisions that fall under your commandments, under your statutes, so that I can teach your people your ways, and I can be found faithful in guiding people towards you. Solomon realizes the weight of the responsibility entrusted to him. He is to replace his father David as the king of Israel. He is the one now in charge of making sure that the people know who God is, the people are aware of God. He is the spiritual guide, per se, of the people of Israel. Above the prophets, or in line with the prophets, he is the one. He's the king of Israel. He has a holy responsibility, and it weighs on him. He displays humility, and he's not merely asking for, give me wisdom so, that I may know what to do with my IRA, or that I may, that I might know what to do with my taxes and how to, properly fill my taxes, so that I might send my kids to the best college, and he's not merely asking for good common sense. He's asking, God, give me wisdom that I might lead your people faithfully. That's an important thing to know. The second thing is, possessing wisdom does not remove the power of being influenced by others. And this is important because basically Solomon's demise comes in breaking a commandment that God had instructed through the generations of the people of Israel. When the people of Israel leave Egypt, the one continuous thing that God reminds them of is, do not marry foreign women. Do not marry outside of my people. And this is what Solomon does. If you notice chapter 3, I know the lesson starts in verse 5, but read back chapter 3, verse 1. It says, Solomon made a marriage alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Later we're told that Solomon had 700 wives, 300 concubines. He had all these women around him. And outside the obvious sexual sin, at his old age, the Bible tells us that he began worshiping their gods. To appease these women, to appease the women he had married, he began to lay sacrifices to their gods. And you might ask yourself, well, wasn't this the most wise person? Wasn't this, the great King Solomon, the wisest man in the history of humanity? The answer is yes, it was. But he was also a sinful man. And when you go away from the commandments of God, when you start doing things outside of God's will, outside of God's written law, these consequences abound. And more specifically, you can be the smartest person around, but you can still be subject to the influence of others. So that's something that we need to watch for. And ultimately, 1 Kings 11, 9 through 13, we read about the consequences that disobedience and sin cause. Through Solomon, Israel is split up, but God chooses to keep a remnant of Israel, to keep one of the tribes in remembrance of the promises he had made to David. However, the disobedience had its consequences. So, as you teach this lesson, keep in mind that wisdom comes from God. And it's something we should ask for, and it's something that we should hope to attain. But let us not forget that we are still sinful creatures, that we still have sinful inclinations, and that aside from pretending to know everything, we can still fall short of the glory of God, and we still fall short of the glory of God. So I pray for you this week, that you would have a good lesson this week, and any questions you might have, feel free to call me or email me. Thank you, guys.